In the last 48 hours, a rapidly escalating confrontation between two powerful nations has pushed the world into a moment of deep uncertainty. The situation involves rising tensions between the United States and Iran, and the stakes could not be higher. At the center of the crisis is a narrow stretch of water that controls a massive portion of the world's energy supply, the Strait of Hormuz. Speaking from Florida, U.S. President Donald Trump delivered a warning that immediately caught global attention. If Iran attempts to block oil shipments moving through this crucial route, he said the United States could dramatically intensify its military response. The statement quickly sent shockwaves through financial markets and raised fears that the conflict could spiral into a much larger regional crisis. But in the same breath, Trump made another surprising claim. Despite the escalating rhetoric and growing military actions, he suggested the war might actually end much sooner than many experts expected. According to him, the conflict could conclude well before the 4-week timeline he had previously mentioned. That contradiction has left analysts asking a difficult question. Is the world moving closer to de-escalation, or standing at the edge of a much bigger confrontation? Meanwhile, Iran's leadership has made its own position clear. Officials say they, not Washington, will decide when this conflict comes to an end. And at the same time, a dramatic political development inside Iran has changed the entire power structure of the country. With a new leader emerging in Tehran, global oil markets shaking, and military strikes expanding across the region, the situation is evolving by the hour. And what happened next made the story even more complicated. But that was only the beginning. Just hours after tensions began dominating headlines around the world, Donald Trump delivered a statement that dramatically changed the tone of the entire conflict. Speaking to reporters, the U.S. president issued a direct warning to Iran, one that immediately caught the attention of governments, markets, and military analysts across the globe. Trump said the United States would respond with overwhelming force if Iran attempted to block oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway that plays an enormous role in global energy supply. Nearly 1/5 of the world's oil normally passes through this strategic corridor every single day. Any disruption there could ripple across the entire global economy. According to Trump, U.S. forces have already inflicted significant damage on Iran's military infrastructure. He claimed that Iranian Air Force and naval capabilities had been seriously weakened during the opening phase of the conflict. While independent confirmation of the full extent of that damage remains limited, the message from Washington was clear. The United States believes it currently holds a strong military advantage. Yet even as he warned of potential escalation, Trump made another unexpected prediction. He suggested the war might end far sooner than originally expected. Earlier in the conflict, the administration had indicated that operations could last several weeks. But now, Trump hinted that the situation could wrap up well before that timeline. However, one major question remains unanswered. What exactly would count as victory? So far, U.S. officials have offered different explanations. Some say the primary objective is to weaken Iran's missile capabilities and prevent the development of nuclear weapons. Others have hinted at broader political goals, including forcing changes within Iran's leadership. Trump himself has suggested that the conflict might only truly end when Iran's government becomes more cooperative with the international community. That uncertainty has made investors nervous and diplomats cautious. Within minutes of Trump's remarks, financial markets around the world began reacting. Oil prices surged sharply as traders feared disruptions to energy supply. Stock markets fluctuated wildly as uncertainty spread through global financial systems. And while Washington was signaling both confidence and urgency, the response from Tehran made it clear that the situation was far from resolved. Because Iran had its own message for the world, and it was just as defiant. But Iran's reaction came quickly, and it was anything but conciliatory. Soon after the warning from Donald Trump, officials in Tehran delivered a message that signaled the conflict could be far from over. A spokesperson for the powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, often known as the IRGC, declared that Iran, not Washington, would decide when the war actually ends. The Economic Times +1. The statement immediately raised the stakes. According to Iranian state media reports, the Revolutionary Guards warned that if U.S. and Israeli strikes continue, Iran could move to block oil exports across the entire region. And their warning was blunt. Not a single liter of oil would be allowed to leave Middle Eastern shipping routes under those conditions. For energy analysts, that threat is extremely serious. Much of the world's oil supply travels through the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow maritime corridor connecting the Persian Gulf to international markets. Around 1/5 of global oil shipments normally pass through this route. Even a temporary disruption there could send energy prices soaring and trigger economic shockwaves across multiple continents. AP News. And signs of disruption are already appearing. Energy companies and shipping firms have begun adjusting their operations as the conflict intensifies. Some tankers have reportedly avoided entering the region, while oil infrastructure across the Gulf faces growing security risks. Analysts warn that if the standoff continues, the global energy market could face one of its most serious supply disruptions in years. Reuters. But the message from Tehran went beyond economics. Iranian officials made it clear that they believe the country is prepared for a prolonged confrontation. Some leaders within the government say Iran is ready to continue military operations as long as necessary, insisting that outside pressure will not force the country to surrender or change its policies. In other words, while Washington talks about ending the conflict quickly, Tehran is signaling that it is ready for a much longer fight. And at the same time, a dramatic political development inside Iran has changed the balance of power in the country's leadership. Because just as the conflict was escalating, a new figure suddenly emerged at the top of Iran's political system. And just when the world was trying to gauge Iran's next move, a major political shift inside Tehran sent shockwaves across the region. Mojtaba Khamenei was officially declared Iran's new supreme leader, taking the place of his father, Ali Khamenei, who had reportedly been killed during the early days of the conflict. Mojtaba, 56, is a Shiite cleric closely tied to Iran's elite security forces and their sprawling business network. Analysts immediately noted that his rise signals hardliners are firmly in control, setting a tone that may make Iran far less willing to compromise. This isn't just a ceremonial change. Leadership transitions in Iran often define the direction of both domestic and foreign policy, especially in moments of crisis. State media captured the significance of the moment, showing large crowds in Tehran and other major cities rallying behind the new leader. Portraits of both Mojtaba and his late father were displayed on stages, while citizens chanted slogans like "God is the greatest." The imagery was unmistakable. The regime is determined to project unity and strength, even in the midst of war. For the international community, this development raised serious questions. Trump and U.S. officials have repeatedly described Iran's leadership as a major obstacle, demanding a compliant government as a condition for ending hostilities. Now, with a hardline figure at the top, analysts fear the path toward negotiation, or even a temporary ceasefire, could become far more complicated. But the reaction inside Iran itself is far from uniform. While some citizens rallied with visible enthusiasm, others quietly expressed fear that the new leadership would stifle any hope for change. It's a moment of tension within the country as much as it is on the international stage, with ordinary Iranians caught between the pressure of global conflict and the grip of a regime determined to show strength. And while Iran consolidates power at home, the conflict is already shaking markets and threatening global energy supplies. Leadership has been far from unified, and in many ways, it exposes deep cracks within Iranian society. On the surface, state media and government institutions have worked hard to project an image of broad support for Mojtaba Khamenei as the country's new supreme leader. Across major cities like Tehran and Isfahan, official broadcasts showed crowds waving flags and pledging allegiance to him, echoing messages of national unity and steadfast resistance against foreign pressure. State television even referred to Mojtaba with religious titles once reserved for Iran's highest clerical figures, further reinforcing the regime's attempt to cement his authority. But that's only part of the picture. Independent reporting and international outlets reveal a very different undercurrent. In private conversations and online spaces, despite ongoing internet blackouts and heavy censorship, many ordinary Iranians express fear, frustration, or outright hostility toward the sudden dynastic transfer of power. Some critics argue that elevating Mojtaba, a figure widely seen as even more hardline than his father, signals a further tightening of authoritarian control, rather than a step toward reform. The Guardian. Opposition voices inside the country describe the new leadership as a continuation, not a break, of decades-long repression. Chants like "Death to Mojtaba" have appeared in digital clips shared by Iranians resisting the regime, even as heavy crackdowns limit public protests. The Guardian. Others worry the succession may strengthen the grip of powerful institutions, such as the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and pro-regime militias, making dissent more dangerous and political change more distant than ever. The weak. At the same time, some Iranians, especially those aligned with conservative or religious factions, have publicly welcomed the leadership change as a sign of resilience against external threats and foreign hostility. They see it as a reaffirmation of Iran's political system and a demonstration that the nation will endure, even in war. Al-Jazeera. This split reflects a broader reality inside the country. State control and patriotic symbolism on one side, and deep skepticism and suppressed dissent on the other. It's a nation trying to appear unified while simultaneously grappling with profound internal disagreements. And many analysts believe those tensions will play a major role in shaping Iran's response to the ongoing conflict. The Guardian. And while Iranian society wrestles with these divisions, the world is watching how global leaders react. And while Iran navigates internal divisions, the effects of the conflict are being felt far beyond its borders, especially in global energy markets. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz, even temporarily, sent immediate shockwaves through the world economy. This narrow maritime choke point normally channels nearly 1/5 of the world's daily oil supply, and with tanker traffic effectively halted, prices surged dramatically. At one point, Brent crude futures jumped as much as 29% in a single trading session, the steepest spike in years. Reuters.com. Stock markets around the globe reacted with volatility. Investors scrambled to adjust portfolios in response to the uncertainty, while traders closely monitored any signals from Washington or Tehran that could indicate whether the conflict might ease or escalate further. The surge in energy prices isn't just an economic issue. It carries deep political consequences as well. In the United States, for example, gasoline costs remain a top concern for voters ahead of the upcoming midterm elections. Analysts warn that rising fuel prices could influence public opinion and voter behavior, adding pressure on leaders to act swiftly. Even countries far removed from the conflict felt the ripple effects. Nations heavily dependent on imported oil faced higher energy bills almost immediately, while some OPEC members, including Saudi Arabia, announced cuts in production to stabilize prices, further fueling market swings. And yet, despite the chaos, there were signs of possible relief. Following discussions with global partners, President Donald Trump hinted at easing oil-related sanctions on certain countries, and even considered releasing reserves from the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Stockpile. These moves were seen as potential short-term measures to calm the markets, though experts warned that the underlying geopolitical tension remained unresolved. The message was clear. In today's interconnected world, a conflict in the Middle East can instantly ripple through economies thousands of miles away, impacting ordinary consumers, traders, and governments alike. But as financial markets teetered between fear and relief, military developments on the ground continued to escalate, showing that the economic shock was just one layer of a much bigger global crisis. And as energy markets swung wildly, President Donald Trump began turning to global allies for solutions, signaling that the United States was preparing to balance military action with strategic diplomacy. In a series of high-level discussions, Trump spoke with Vladimir Putin, exploring ways to ease global energy shortages without weakening the U.S. position. Among the options reportedly on the table was a partial waiver of oil-related sanctions on certain countries, potentially allowing Russian oil to flow more freely to international markets. Such a move could help stabilize supply chains, but might also complicate Washington's broader strategy against Moscow. Other measures under consideration included releasing crude from U.S. strategic reserves and regulating exports in a way that could temporarily ease the global energy crunch. Analysts noted that these steps, while technical, have immediate political and economic consequences. In the U.S., higher gasoline prices are a top concern for voters, and any move that lowers costs could influence public opinion ahead of upcoming elections. Trump's outreach to allies also underscored a broader message. The war in the Middle East is not just a regional issue. It has far-reaching implications for global politics, trade, and energy security. Countries across Europe and Asia were closely monitoring the situation, preparing contingency plans in case the Strait of Hormuz remained closed or oil prices surged even further. Yet even as diplomacy began to unfold on a global scale, the reality on the ground was stark. Iranian and Israeli military actions continued, and tensions along multiple fronts showed that solutions through dialogue alone might not be enough to prevent further escalation. And as leaders worked behind the scenes, the fighting on the ground was intensifying, threatening not only regional stability, but also the safety of millions of civilians. And while diplomacy and market maneuvers unfolded, the reality on the ground painted a far more dangerous picture. Military operations across the Middle East intensified, showing that the conflict is anything but contained. In Iran, airstrikes reportedly targeted key infrastructure, including a major oil refinery near Tehran, sending plumes of black smoke into the sky and raising concerns about environmental and public health risks. According to the World Health Organization, the fires could contaminate air, water, and food supplies, adding a humanitarian dimension to the crisis. Meanwhile, Israel expanded its military campaign. Reports indicate new strikes in central Iran and even in Beirut, Lebanon, following cross-border attacks by Hezbollah, which is aligned with Tehran. These operations underscore the regional reach of the conflict and highlight how proxy forces and local militias are becoming active participants. The fighting has not been contained within borders. Turkey reported that a ballistic missile fired from Iran entered Turkish airspace and had to be intercepted by NATO air defenses, the second such incident since the start of the war. Iran, however, has not commented publicly on these missile incidents, leaving neighbors on high alert. Civilian casualties are mounting. According to Iran's UN ambassador, U.S. and Israeli strikes have killed at least 1,332 Iranian civilians and injured thousands more. Lebanon has reported more than 400 deaths, with nearly 700,000 people displaced due to attacks and regional instability. Even in Israel, civilians are affected. One man was killed near Tel Aviv's international airport from shrapnel caused by Iranian strikes, raising the local death toll to 11. The military escalation shows that the conflict is no longer just a matter of strategic positioning. It is a full-blown regional confrontation, involving airstrikes, missile interceptions, and cross-border engagements, and the human cost is growing by the day. And while the fighting continues, the big question looms over the horizon. How long will this war last, and who will decide when it finally ends? Because even as Trump claims the war could be over soon, Tehran insists the timing is theirs to control, leaving the world watching, waiting, and bracing for the next move. And now, the world faces a precarious moment. On one hand, President Donald Trump predicts the conflict could end sooner than expected, signaling hope for a swift resolution. On the other, Iran insists it will determine the timing and terms of the war, sending a clear message that it will not bend to external pressure. Global energy markets remain volatile, with oil prices swinging wildly as every new report from the region hits headlines. Stock exchanges, shipping routes, and even consumer confidence are all caught in the crossfire, highlighting just how far-reaching the consequences of this conflict are. Inside Iran, the emergence of Mojtaba Khamenei as supreme leader has reinforced hardline control, while citizens navigate a mix of fear, loyalty, and skepticism. Regional powers like Israel, Lebanon, and Turkey are also directly affected, with military actions, missile interceptions, and escalating strikes showing no signs of slowing. In short, the crisis is evolving on multiple fronts: military, political, and economic, and no single factor seems likely to resolve it quickly. Every decision, from the halls of Washington to the streets of Tehran, has the potential to reshape the region and the world. And as the days unfold, one question remains at the heart of it all. Will this conflict find a path to de-escalation? Or are we on the brink of a far larger confrontation that could redefine the Middle East forever? The world is watching, the markets are trembling, and every move counts.